In the forthcoming midterm elections in the United States on Tuesday, November 8, all 435 seats in the House of Representatives are being contested, while 35 are up for grabs in the Senate. Though Democrats currently hold both chambers of Congress, they are expected to lose the House and are in dead heat for control of the Senate, according to polls. The outcome of the election will determine the composition of the US Congress and the power structure in 3 dozen states. It will shape the rest of Joe Biden's presidency and also impact America's posture towards the rest of the world. It will also set the stage for 2024 presidential election in the country. Midterms are often seen as a referendum on the sitting president, and with Mr. Biden's approval hovering at 40%. Republicans have fought plenty to criticize as Americans worry about high inflation, guns, and immigration. Group of 7 G7 countries have called for an extension of the UN-brokered grain deal after a 2-day meeting in the western German town. In a joint statement, G7 foreign countries ministers said that they strongly support the United Nations Secretary General's call for the extension of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which has reduced global food prices. They also urged Russia to heed the Secretary General's call. On Wednesday, November 2nd, Russia resumed its participation in the Black Sea grain deal after securing guarantees from Ukraine on the non-use of humanitarian corridor and ports designated for the export of agriculture products for military operations. The UN-brokered Black Sea Grain Initiative was signed during a ceremony in Istanbul in July. Under the deal, ships transporting grains from 3 Ukrainian ports travel along an agreed corridor to markets worldwide. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been elected as new president of Brazil. He defeated incumbent President Jair Bolsonaro in a close contest. Lula da Silva has secured 50.83% of the votes, whereas his opponent Bolsonaro managed to get 49.17% votes. Lula da Silva, 76, focused his campaign on getting Bolsonaro out of office and highlighted his past achievements throughout his campaign. His campaign promised a new tax regime that will allow for higher public spending. He has vowed to end hunger in the country, which has returned during the Bolsonaro government. Whereas Bolsonaro, 67, ran for re-election under the conservative Liberal Party, he has campaigned to increase mining, privatize public companies, and generate more sustainable energy to bring down energy prices. The United Nations in its report said that the temperature in Europe have increased at more than twice the global average over the past 3 decades, showing the fastest rise of any continent on Earth. The UN's World Meteorological Organization and European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service in a joint report found that the European region has on average seen temperature rise 0.5 degrees Celsius each decade since 1991. As a result, alpine glaciers lost 30 meters in ice thickness between 1997 and 2021, while Greenland ice sheet is swiftly melting and contributing to accelerating sea level rise. Last year, Greenland experienced melting and the first ever recorded rainfall at its highest point. The record cautioned that, regardless of future levels of global warming, temperatures would likely continue to rise across Europe at a rate exceeding global mean temperature changes. The new report released ahead of UN's 27th Conference on Climate Change set to open in Egypt on Sunday examined the situation in Europe up to and including 2021. It found that last year, high-impact weather and climate events, mainly floods and storms, led to hundreds of deaths directly affected more than 500,000 people and caused economic damage across Europe exceeding $50 billion. At the same time, the report highlighted some positives, including the success of many European countries in slashing greenhouse gas emissions. Israelis began voting on Tuesday for the fifth time in less than 4 years to elect a new parliament. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is bidding for a comeback. After years of deadlock, voter exasperation may hurt turnout, but surging support for the ultra-nationalist, religious Zionism bloc and firebrand co-leader Itamar Ben-Gvir has galvanized the campaign. Outgoing centralist Prime Minister Yair Lapid is also in the race. Israel's longest-serving premier Netanyahu is on trial on corruption charges, which he denies, but his rightist Likud party is still expected to finish as the largest in parliament. This will be the first time since 2009 when Mr. Netanyahu is running into polls not as the incumbent prime minister. As polls opened on Tuesday, the final opinion polls from last week showed him still short of the 61 seats needed for a majority in the 120-seat Knesset, opening the prospect of weeks of coalition, wrangling, and possibly new elections. The security and surging prices have topped the list of voters concerned in a campaign triggered by defections from the unlikely ruling coalition of right-wing centralist and Arab parties formed after the last election. The last 4 elections in Israel ended in an indecisive mandate as alliances fell short of the majority mark in the Knesset. Ethiopian scientists have said that an invasive species of mosquito was likely responsible for a large malaria outbreak in Ethiopia this year. Ethiopian scientists presented research that says a malaria outbreak in the city of Dire Dawa was strongly linked to the invasive Anopheles stephensii species of mosquito. The number of cases reported in the city jumped from 205 in 2019 to 2,400 in the first 5 months of 2022, largely in the dry season. The species of mosquito is typically found around India and Iran. However, in 2012, it was spotted in Djibouti and has now also been found in neighboring Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia, as well as in Nigeria. According to the media reports that when the mosquito was first detected in Djibouti, the country was close to eradicating malaria with just 27 reported cases that year. Meanwhile, by 2020, there were 73,000 cases reported in the country. In 2020, 95% of the world's 627,000 malaria deaths were in Africa. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan was injured in an apparent assassination attempt after a gunman opened fire at his rally in the Wazirabad district in eastern Punjab province. Multiple local news channels reported that the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chairman sustained bullet injuries on his leg during the attack. He was rushed to a hospital and is now in a stable condition. The lone attacker was arrested immediately. 1 person killed and 8 others were injured in the assassination attempt. The former prime minister was leading a long anti-government march towards Islamabad. Media reports said the firing took place near the container-mounted truck carrying cricketer-turned-politician during his protest march. Imran Khan was traveling in a large convoy of trucks and cars heading towards the capital as a part of his campaign aimed at forcing the government to hold early elections. Pakistan's former Prime Minister was ousted in a no-confidence vote in Parliament in April this year. He has alleged that his ouster was a conspiracy engineered by his successor Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif that the new premier has denied. Taking to Twitter, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif condemned the firing incident and directed Interior Minister to seek an immediate report from the Inspector General of Police and Chief Secretary of Punjab. The SCO member states on Tuesday confirmed their commitment to formation of a more representative, democratic, just and multipolar world order based on universally recognized principles of the international law and multilateralism. In a joint communique following the meeting of the CHG of SCO member states, the heads of delegations emphasized that the member states should adhere to a line that excludes bloc, ideological, and confrontational approaches to solving the problems of international and regional development. Taking into account the member states' opinions, they confirmed relevance of the initiatives to promote interactions in building the new type international relations in the spirit of mutual respect, justice, equality, and mutually beneficial cooperation. They expressed their support for India's chairmanship in the organization in 2022 to 23. The heads of delegations confirmed that the SCO member states considered it important to further improve the architecture of global economic governance. They said they will consistently advocate and strengthen an open, transparent, fair, inclusive, and non discriminatory multilateral trading system based on the World Trade Organization's principles and rules. They stressed that unilateral application of economic sanctions other than those adopted by UN Security Council is incompatible with the international law principles and has a negative impact on international economic relations. They were in favor of deepening interaction in the field of digital economy and digital technologies to ensure inclusive economic growth of SCO member states to achieve goals of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, on Friday called for stronger political commitment and action to improve the lives of roughly 4.3 million stateless people worldwide who are languishing without citizenship and living in the shadows. Statelessness is a pervasive and grave human rights violation as well as a blight on humanity, he said. Deprived of the fundamental right to a nationality, those who have been born or left stateless face a devastating legal limbo. They are prevented from accessing their basic human rights and from fully participating in society. Their lives are marked by exclusion, deprivation, and marginalization. We all belong. Mr. Grandi made the appeal as Friday marked the 8th anniversary of I Belong, a campaign launched by UN Refugee Agency. UNHCR aimed at ending stateless within a decade or by 2024. Progress has been made in the interim. Nearly 450,000 stateless people either have acquired nationality or had their nationality confirmed. Additionally, tens of thousands of people across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americans now have a pathway to citizenship thanks to newly enacted legislative changes. While most people probably take their nationality for granted, not having papers can make life difficult. A phenomenon called coronal holes was recently spotted on the sun. These are the regions on sun's surface from where fast solar wind gushes out into space. Because they contain little solar material, they have lower temperatures and thus appear much darker than their surroundings. Here the magnetic field is open to interplanetary space, sending solar material out in a high-speed stream of solar wind. Coronal holes can last between a few weeks to months. The holes are not a unique phenomenon, appearing throughout Sun's approximately 11-year solar cycle. They can last much longer during solar minimum, a period of time when activity on the sun is substantially diminished, according to NASA. While it is unclear what causes coronal holes, they correlate to areas on the sun where magnetic fields soar up and away without looping back down to the surface as they do elsewhere. These coronal holes are important to understanding the space environment around the Earth. Scientists study these fast solar wind streams because they sometimes interact with Earth's magnetic field, creating what is called a geomagnetic storm, which can expose satellites to radiation and interfere with communication signals.